Hello, everyone, and welcome to Criminal Mischief, the art and science of crime fiction. I'm DP Lyle, your host, and today we have a very special guest, right straight out of the NYPD and a lot of other hats that he's worn over his career. But John Ferriso. John, how you doing?
Doing great tonight, Doug.
Well, it's great to have you here. I hear it's raining in New York right now. It's supposed to start raining in a couple of days here in California, so we'll send it your way after we're through with it. So you've had an interesting career. I mean, obviously you were a sergeant in the NYPD. How did you matriculate, if you will, toward law enforcement? What led you there? Were there things about your childhood or growing up or schooling that you said, I want to be a cop, man. That's what I want to do.
Yes, I'm one of those people that just knew it from a very early age. I was intrigued by cop shows at a very young age, and a lot of the '70s cop shows, I couldn't get enough of them, and I watched them all. Some I liked better than others, and would watch them. And then I would say, I also come from Queens, New York, and a lot of police officers turn out of this neighborhood. It's a very blue collar area, and I would say they pump out the city workers. So, they're pumping out the NYPD. The NYPD has 30,000 officers. So it's
Wow.
not uncommon for everybody to know an officer. And I used to play stickball on the block with my friends, and there was seven of us. Five of us became cops.
Wow.
So that's the crew of friends I had. And I would watch the police cars pass. And I lived in a safe neighborhood of Queens. I'm about 7 miles from Manhattan. Lived in a safe neighborhood, but it was the '70s.
Yeah.
And, I would watch the police cars pass and I would see them in the car and I go, I want to go with them. I want to go where they're going. And when they were parked, I wanted to know what they were talking about, what they were doing. And, my dad would take me to see cop shows. My dad wasn't a police officer, but my uncle was, and my cousin was. So there was police in my family. And besides the fact that my neighborhood had a lot of police officers, I would see them coming on different tours and with their suits, and guys weren't in suits, and guys weren't in uniform. And most of them didn't talk about work, police work. That wasn't common until more recently.
Sure.
And, in the '70s, New York City was very dangerous. So we were warned at a young age. We had Son of Sam was in my neighborhood as when I grew up, and he murdered three people very close to my house, walking distance to my home, two in a car and one walking. So as a kid, we were told by our families, anybody else's parents, it's getting dark, get off the stoop, go inside. The Son of Sam's around. And if you could believe, a 7-year-old was talked to that way, which is what happened. And not only was I taught to that way, I used to read the newspapers. Well, I probably wasn't reading it. I was just looking at the pictures, and there was crime scene pictures of what this, serial killer, which we found out later on, was doing. And it was, I wouldn't say terrifying because you're a kid, you don't know, but you knew there was danger out there. And women were dyeing their hair. It was on the news every night. And then
Right.
when they captured him, I was very fascinated. I was only 7 years old. I was very fascinated about the gun, the car, the license plate, the ticket to the car. I remember people talking about it. I was very fascinated that somebody caught this guy, and I felt like the good guys caught the bad guys at a young age.
Hmm.
So, crime was there, and I wanted to fight crime, and I knew it at a young age. And I remember talking about it in school. And you mentioned early in the interview, what about your schooling that made you? Well, actually, I was such a bad student that I guess a city job was pretty much where I was going anyway. So,
Well, one of the things about
yeah,
Son of Sam is when they finally caught him and you actually saw this guy, you're thinking, really? This is the guy that did all this? Because he looks so sad and unassuming and doughy and passive, and it's like, really? But over the years we've learned, BTK and Jeffrey
sure.
Dahmer and Ted Bundy. I mean, some of the big names. You could walk down the street and see them and talk to them in a coffee shop, and you would never, ever, ever suspect. That's the spooky part. So, did you read a lot of crime fiction and stuff like that? Did you start getting in the novels and stuff at an early age, or just read the newspaper? That was probably enough in the New York area. Yeah.
Well, the newspaper basically had every crime, it was the
Exactly.
'70s, so you had it all. And in the '80s, I remember when crack came out and I saw
Uh,
how it damaged. I saw how I had friends in the neighborhood that would come home with black eyes and beat up. I got beat up last night. And then later on, I'm like, I think this guy's on drugs. And, we need to
Yeah.
stay away from this guy. Crack
Yeah.
hit the city
Yeah.
hard. It wasn't sold by me, but, there was users. And, I kind of saw the good and bad in people even then. And then I, I didn't read much in school. I definitely watched cop shows and I
Right.
analyzed it. I analyzed TV shows. Hill Street Blues, I believe, was the best police show ever.
Yes.
I definitely analyzed it. The characters were, I could
Bonds.
tell when,
Loved Bonds. Yes.
yeah, I forgot some of the names, but the
Yeah.
sergeant at the desk, I mean, I thought about him
Dennis
later in my
Franz
career,
played Bonds.
actually.
Yeah, he was great,
Okay,
man.
that's him.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
So I would watch that show and I would even know, I would say, a police officer must have wrote this script because
Mm.
they had it on the money. Because I watch shows now and it's very Hollywood, and any cop will tell you when we watch a Hollywood cop show, we're like, okay, listen, let's go do something else. This isn't cop. So I'm still analyzing the shows, but so Hill Street Blues really, Fort Apache to Bronx, probably the best cop movie ever made. Very realistic. Although the busyness of that precinct was definitely happened. I know people that work there in the Bronx. And so I wasn't, I wasn't reading a lot, but I was analyzing the cop
Sure.
movies I watched. And I was talking to people who were in law enforcement. I knew friends from the gym, that older guys that were in law enforcement. And they would say, kid, what are you doing? It's like, I'm in college. So that's good. What are you going to do? I'll be a police officer. And a lot of them would say, don't do that. And I go, why not? They go, because I'm doing it. I'm telling you not to do it. And I go, but I want to. And they were like, don't do it. But I'm like, I'm telling you, I want to be a cop. And they're like, well, if you really do. And they laid it all out to me. And I was like, no, I'm ready for that. I could do it. I'm
Mm.
ready. And then I was in college. And I remembered in college, a lot of times I was given the choice of reading what I wanted to read, which was different from when I was younger. So when I was able to read what I wanted to read, it was always police related stories. It was always
Sure.
detectives, crimes, or famous people that were involved in stuff. It was always some type of crime aspect to it, or at least that was the most popular books. I'm not popular, the most
Mm.
books I liked the most. So when I started reading, I said to myself, John, you're going to be a police officer one day, and you're also going to be a writer. So I said I was going to do that in college. And so I didn't craft my skills yet. I would read a lot of short stories written by police officers. That was kind of, I found that an easy read, and I found that very right to the point without a lot of waste in between. They really told you from the beginning to the end in a couple of pages, and you went on to
Right.
the next story. It could be a burglary, it could be a robbery. And I was reading those stories and I said, wow, when I get into law enforcement, I'm going to start writing right away. And I made a deal with myself. I said, when you get to police academy, you have to spend some time writing even that night. And
Yep.
I would start putting pen to paper, even if it was not something that was worth writing about. In the police academy, I started writing. None of those police academy stories made it to my book. I mentioned the police academy a few times, but none of the stories did because they weren't interesting enough. But definitely, that's when my writing began.
Sure. Well, one of the hats that you wore when you were with the police department was in internal affairs. Kind of the cops investigating cops is how at least the public sees it. What was that like, and and what's it really like? I mean, it's always adversarial, like cats and dogs you see on TV, and I imagine that it can be. But what's it really like if you're are you really hated as much as they? Yeah, are people really afraid of the internal affairs?
Well, what's interesting is few people who worked in internal affairs talk about it, and
Yeah,
for whatever reason, you'd have to ask them personally why they don't talk about it.
right.
But there's definitely a fear of internal affairs. That fear of internal affairs is put into you. I don't know about other police departments, but the NYPD will tell you early on if you make a mistake. I'm not talking a mistake. I'm talking if you commit a crime or
Yeah,
you're associating with criminals, the IAB is going to find you, and they're going to bring departmental charges against you. And
sure.
so that was brought in. That fear was thrown at us early on, and we had classes about it, corruption and everything. I never expected to go to internal affairs ever. So
Right.
interesting. What happens was every police department does their the hierarchy different. I wanted to be a detective early on, even though I was a police officer. I wanted to be a detective. So I studied and I made sergeant. So I skipped the detective rank. So I was a sergeant on patrol. Other police departments may do it differently. I'm sergeant on patrol in uniform, and I want to do investigations because on patrol, you do a quick investigation. You either arrest the person or you make the report and you give it to the detectives. And detectives do all the desk work and they do the more interesting stuff. And I always would watch them and watch how they did it. And there was a tremendous amount of experience with these guys. So technically, I was their supervisor, but in reality, they were doing the real investigation. I would just making the report. Well, there was times I arrested a guy and said, "Listen, this guy's his girlfriend saying he's wanted for a homicide. I only have him for domestic violence. He's not talking. He's downstairs. I think you should go talk to him." They were the experts. I sent them downstairs to talk to him because NYPD is a big department. The resources are there. There's a lot of resources.
Yeah.
So I I started putting in for investigative units. And I mean investigative units like anybody that does any type of investigation, whether it's a burglary, a robbery, narcotics. I obviously wanted the detective bureau, but the NYPD has a lot of smaller units. And on the side, people were telling me, because I was never getting interviews. And on the side, people were telling me, you have no investigative experience. You have no investigative experience. So we have a something called career path, which means that you are telling you're willing to be an investigator, and anyone you could get picked up by anybody. You can't say no. So what happens is people don't want to put in for that because internal affairs grabs you as the one person like that wants you. So I didn't have a real, we call it a hook. I'm sure people put it in their books. That term is used, the hook.
Yep.
I didn't have a hook. Well, hook means that you're put on the pile here. Okay, you don't go to internal affairs. You're going to where you want to go. So I went on the interview, and it's very like TV. That's one thing TV and movies have correct. The NYPD interviews are a little confrontational. It's a little there's no HR in the room. I guess you'd put it that way. It's very why are you here and what do you want to do, John, Mr. Ferriso? Why are you here in my office? Where are you looking to go? So I'm sitting there and I'm giving them my story about everything I've done that's so great. And you know, there's 5 captains there, and narcotics wasn't talking to me, detective bureau wasn't talking to me, organized crime wasn't talking to me, and some other guy went, I don't know. The only person who was interested in talking to me was the internal affairs guy. So sure enough, I had already submitted the application for anybody, and internal affairs grabbed me. So the only good thing out of that is internal in the NYPD, you have to give them 2 years. So it's not a commitment forever. It's a 2-year commitment, which means that you give them 2 years, you could stay, you could leave. The only good thing is there's 2 good things. One is they'll let you pretty much go wherever you want, which is great because that worked out awesome for me later on in my career. And they'll give you a tremendous amount of experience. When I say tremendous amount of experience, is because when you investigate a police officer, it's not like a criminal on the street where criminal on the street hits somebody in the back of the head and robs them. Okay, maybe you got him for the assault, maybe you got him for the robbery. Okay, at least we got him for the assault. Let's lock him up. We got him. Maybe we can't get him for the robbery. When you investigate a police officer, they put a tremendous amount of investigation into the incident, not really the officer, the incident. It encompasses witnesses, video, possibly online information. And a lot of officers don't understand this. And there is a fear, and there's a lot of people that don't like internal affairs. And I will say that the people that don't, sometimes they're incorrect. And internal affairs is actually trying to clear the office, because I cleared so many officers. They don't know it, but I cleared so many officers of wrongdoing that they were accused of. Not that they did. And it's very common for an officer to be accused of something very high, and then they only did something very low. So it's not criminal, it's departmental, but it's nothing major. It's not going to ruin their career. So that happens too. So, but there are cases, and there are severe cases where, man, you're like, there was times I could not believe what came across my desk was legit. Legit is like, that officer did this. Like, he was accused of something very serious, and he confessed to it and resigned. Well, like, whoa, like this guy did what they said he did. So there are bad apples. They end up human nature. It's a big department. I think if every job or career in this country had a version of internal affairs, everybody would be shocked at what people got accused of or actually did. Mm-hmm. So internal affairs is necessary. I will say they're not really hated. They're very definitely disliked and not trusted. But when people get to realize that, the people that go through internal affairs, they do a job, they do it good, they move on to something else, and they clear out anyone that shouldn't be there, and they clear the people who are accused that didn't do it.
Yep.
I feel this internal affairs is necessary.
Yeah, and I think it's a good point you made that they're really trying to prove that this isn't that big of a deal. because it hurts the department. It hurts them personally. It hurts a friend. It hurts a colleague. It hurts someone in the blue. I mean, it does all these things. Same way in medicine, basically, medicine tries to police itself, but it's very hard because when you're in a position like that, I've been in many times where you're looking at a situation and trying to decide what to do to resolve it. There's nuances to it. There's this, there's that, there's judgment, there's all kinds of things going into it. And at the end of the day, you want to give every benefit of the doubt that you can. And I'm assuming internal affairs does pretty much the same thing, but some things are so egregious you just say, "Hey, whoa, stop."
Yeah, smoke this
Yeah,
fire.
yeah,
What I used to do is my first assignment was we used to have like a call center, and people would call in tips, and we had the run of the mill person who maybe should have taken his medication. We had the person who it has a real axe to grind with the police. But every once in a while, you got a few that came through, and you said, "Wow, this is needs to be looked at." And I called it smoke this fire. We would look at, is this person accused of the same thing numerous times by different people? Which would
yeah,
be an officer is constantly accused of stealing like something. It's never like, a lot of times we'd get the call, he stole $1,000 from me. When someone says $1,000, let's look into this. It's easy for someone to say. But when someone said, my gold chain, all my change, and my watch were taken, and then, you look into that, you find out, wow, this guy's been accused of taking watches once before. So you got to look at that. And then
sure.
I would take it, I would start the case, and I would give it to the next person who would investigate it further, another unit or another group. And then they did what they did. A lot of times I didn't even find out the end results because
Hmm.
internal affairs is secretive. And, like I said, they clear most of the people. But there
Mhm.
were times that I found out that, this person was, brought up on charges, or this person resigned. It does happen. A lot of times when prisoners were assaulted, the prisoners would say the cop just punched me in the face and broke my jaw. And then I'd interview him, and yeah, the prisoner's got a broken jaw. And then you find out later on that, this guy really beat the cops up before he got his broken jaw. And
Right.
you'd get, you'd get the video from the store video, and you find out that the cops were talking to him for 5 minutes, and then the guy just hit one of the cops. And
Yeah.
not only did he hit him, knocked the cop down and was punching him. So the other cop did what he had to do. So you say, yeah, the prisoner's injured, but so the cops, and his story is not matching up to what the officers are saying. And then
Right.
later on down the line, we would interview the officers because, they have a union. So, and the union, guides them the
Sure.
way they see it.
Sure.
But I would interview the witnesses, and there was a lot of times a witness would come forward and say, and sometimes I had witnesses that they were not the most straight up best people. And they would say, I don't know what just happened, maybe, but that cop was getting his butt kicked. They used their
Yeah.
own term in the Bronx,
Right.
and that cop did what he had to do and whatever. And we would get anonymous calls about what really happened, and many times that cleared the cop officers too.
Sure. Well, from there, you moved on to what I find fascinating is missing persons. Um, uh, you transition from internal affairs to there. Were there other steps in between? And then what was that about? How did missing persons? How did you enjoy that? And what was your real job there?
Yeah, I was very interested in missing person cases. When I used to read, that was another one I read a lot about, and I wrote a story in my book without giving up the whole story. It's called One Phone Call 33 Years Later. It's a very interesting story about how when I was a kid, I was very interested in a case on television. And I watched it on television a lot. I was 9 years old. This was after The Son of Sam, but in the 70s. Watch the case, watch the case, watch the case. And then when I went to missing persons, I was working on that case actually. And the lead
Wow.
detective, he worked on it. I helped him work on it. I was in the office when the call came in that they found someone finally said who had committed that crime of abducting a child. And it's called One Phone Call 33 Years Later because it was 33 years later. I was in the office with one of the detectives when that call came through, and it was wild because everything went full circle from when I was a kid watching it on television
Yeah.
to investigating it and then actually being there when the case was solved. So, and I did some work on it too. And I went. It was a cold case, so I jumped ahead. But going back, what happened was I was interested in missing person cases. I was interested. I was just a kid, and then I read about it, and then so when I left internal affairs, they gave me an option of different units. Now, remember I said before those captains that sat in the room and ignored me?
Hmm.
They started calling me their units. because now I had the experience. Now I had the
Right.
investigative
Exactly.
experience. They had a guy with integrity. This is what the NYPD does. They want guys with integrity there that no one maybe won't do anything stupid because he's working here. So you're out of IAB, but listen, people know where you came from. It's obvious.
Yeah.
But like I said, IAB does such a detailed investigation that I learned a lot. So missing persons was interesting to me. There was reasons the NYPD had a lot of stuff going on at the time. We used to have a thing called CompStat, which was you had to go and stand in front of a podium and tell and about all the crime statistics. Missing persons didn't really have that because writers get this wrong and television gets this wrong. A missing person is usually not a crime. So the reason is because most of these people either run away, suicide is big, or they disappear for a short amount of time, didn't take their medication. So it's not a crime for someone to just disappear and come back.
And
That's not a
most of them
crime.
are
So
adults, right?
while we, you know,
I mean, you
we
do
have a
all,
lot
but
of, yes, we have a lot of juvenile runaways. That is a
yeah,
big number.
that's
That gets into human trafficking. There's a whole thing with that.
yeah, yeah.
So I was very interested in missing person cases. I went there and I figured if I'm going to work in the NYPD, I'm going to work where I obviously I wanted to be a police officer, but I'm going to be a sergeant and an investigator. I'm going to work in a unit that's interesting to me because I could have went to narcotics and made not twice, but a lot more money with the overtime. But do I really want to just put handcuffs on crack dealers all day and crack addicts? I mean, that's hey, there's guys that do that. I think it's great, but I want to investigate the missing people
Mhm.
in the city.
So let's say somebody comes in and says they come into the department and you get called or get assigned a thing that somebody's 14-year-old son's been missing for 48 hours. And they've looked everywhere in the neighborhood. They've contacted all the friends. They've contacted all the relatives. They've gone to the school. They've done all the hospitals. They've done all the things they can think of. We don't know where he is. And the last time we saw him, he left for school, and we haven't seen him in 48 hours. What's the first step you take after that?
Well, you described it well because if a family does do those steps, it's great because we
Yeah,
could work from that and we could narrow it down even further. In a case like that, you say a 14-year-old boy, I say, I do this now in my private eye work, find the
right.
vice and you'll find the missing. When I
Right.
say find the vice, I mean, okay, what's a 14-year-old's vice? Okay, let's narrow it down. Is he smoking marijuana with his friends? Is he smoke? You know, is he a big weed kid? Is he riding a skateboard in the park? Is he a gamer? Is he a big gamer? Is this kid so involved in gaming? I had a case not that long ago where they took the kid's games away and the kid just ran away because he couldn't function without his games. It's the world we live in now. So,
And he's been at
you
a
know,
friend's house playing games for 48 hours. Yes,
yeah, pretty much.
exactly.
That's,
Yep.
well, that's where you can find him is because you find out everything now is not everything, a lot of social media. So, 14 years old, you're going to find out does he have a girlfriend? Okay, if he doesn't have a girlfriend, does he have a best friend? Because that best friend is going to know more than the parents. So you're
Right.
going to go to the best friend and you're going to tell the best friend on the side. Obviously, police work and private eye work's done differently. But as a police officer, I would tell a friend on the side, I would say, listen, you're his best friend. He's not in any trouble. He needs to come home. So, and I would even say at times, listen, if you don't know exactly where he is, can you tell him to contact his family? Because that kind of narrows it
Sure.
down to, okay, he'll be home soon. And a lot of times I would tell the family of the friend, say, listen, there's a possibility he's with him and they're hanging out. And he's not harboring a criminal, but this kid really needs to come clean and say where his friend is. So if he's a gamer, you're going to look into his gaming friends. If he's a skateboarder, you're going to look into his skateboarder. If he's a big weed smoker, you're going to look for the pothead kids in the school. And you're going
Hmm.
to say, when was the last time he bought and where's he buying his marijuana? And
Right.
that would narrow it down. What I used to do, and I used to go on social media and first send the kid a message, and then I would get all his contacts. If he had 110 friends, I would start messaging 110 people. And you'd be surprised when one of his friends, tells him, you better get your butt home because the freaking cops are calling me now. That's very common. I had a guy once call me directly, and he was from the Bronx. He had a heavy accent. He said, "Yo, bro, stop calling my mother-in-law." And he was like, I got to go home. So at times we had to harass the friends, but we were doing our job.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, but if all that comes up empty, and his friends have no idea where he went, and nobody has any ideas what's the next layer that you go down this road in. If you're saying, well, he's not just gaming, he's not just smoking dope with his buddies in a basement somewhere, he's not run away from home with his girlfriend. This kid's disappeared. Obviously, that
Yes.
gets more sinister. Um,
Oh, it definitely does. It's very
yeah,
rare what you just described because a
exactly.
14-year-old who gun runs away,
Yeah,
if we had 100 of them, I would
yeah,
say 98, 99 of them are home within a week.
exactly. If that
It's the one
doesn't
or two you have
happen,
to look.
yeah.
You have to look at suicide even at that age.
Hmm.
Unfortunately, you have to think about that. Now, if a body turns up in the street at a young age, we used to call it the bells and whistles. The bells and whistles will go off.
Yeah,
Everybody's going to know about it. It's not going to be like some old guy who was found in a shopping cart down in the Bowery who drank himself to death. This is a young
right,
kid, 14 years old. The bells and whistles will go off, which means that every precinct is going to contact every detective bureau. Do you have a missing 14-year-old?
right,
So it's a little easier when it's a woman because there is human trafficking aspects. There is human yet trafficking with boys. It's way rarer. A 14-year-old girl, if she's out and not returning home, you have to look for the older boyfriend, which
right,
quite often online is she's 14. It could be a 30-year-old guy who
right,
they're dating, and then I'll give you an example. They dating, and then he says, "Listen, you're my girlfriend. Why don't you come to New Jersey?" And you find out through looking at these websites for prostitutes, they
right,
don't advertise as 14-year-old, but she's being advertised as a 14-year-old, but not online. But you find out that we used to find girls, we find their picture, and we would find that they had like a website where you could meet them at this location, and then we would do a staged meeting, and sometimes the guy would be locked up if he was there, but we would take the main thing is really taking the missing back. So 14-year-old, you have to look into human trafficking. Now, human trafficking doesn't have to be someone from another country bring somebody here. Human
right.
trafficking could be there's gang activity, and it's the main players, the main whatever main gang you could think of in the United States, they're involved in this somehow. And so a 14-year-old boy, you got to remember that too. You got to ask the family, is he a member of this gang? And if he is, then that's the crew he's running with. They have him in a safe house somewhere. And it could be you put a little heat on these gang members saying, listen, do you want to deal with this? You want to send this kids home, or you want us to keep coming to your apartment every night and keep coming to your location every day? Because that's what we would do. We had a 12-year-old runaway once where we harassed these gang members so much that they had a lawyer calling us to say to tell them to leave them alone.
Get the guy in the suit. Exactly.
They had a
That's fun.
lawyer call us to say you have to leave my clients alone. We're like, they passed her from one gang to another. It was like a hierarchy of human trafficking. That's where the human trafficking aspect. So
Yeah,
a 14, like you said before, a 14-year-old not returning and the parents did all that, it will get a lot of attention because
yeah,
a runaway is usually only a few days because most kids, when they run away, they realize the home's not that bad. When they're sleeping in the subway, the New York City subway system, they're going to realize maybe homes and my parents' rules are not that bad. So they will go home. They don't go home right away. You have to look at the more. You said sinister. It's a great word. You have to look at what is really going on.
yeah. Well, let's say it's an adult. What happens when you have an adult that there's John, an adult that has disappeared, and you're trying to figure out um, this person. Maybe they were a spouse, and they were having a contentious marriage, and the
Sure.
person. At what point in time do you start saying they just didn't drive down to Florida and pull into a Motel 6 to hide out for a week, to clear their
Well,
heads? What kinds of things raise the hackles and you say, whoa, wait a minute. There's more to this than just I packed a bag and I'm going away for a while.
you start with what most writers need to know an adult is over 18. So
Yeah,
you're
exactly.
17 years old, you're still considered a runaway. If you're 18, you pretty much can do what you want, but you have to
Right.
look at the situation. Who's this 18-year-old with? Is it an abusive relationship? Is it, there's a lot of things going on with that. So now the 24-hour rule does not exist. There's no such thing as the 24-hour rule.
Good.
I want someone to tell me where that originated from. I don't know. It's probably a movie from the 40s, a James Cagney movie. I can't figure out where that 24-hour rule came in, but it's an urban legend that people need to get out of their heads.
Yeah.
Uh, I've actually on patrol seen people wait 24 hours to call 911.
Wow.
Yeah,
So
that's
if
people
it's a
feel crazy.
minor, there's the ticking clock starts from minute one, I'm assuming. And if it's an
Yes.
adult, it's when something comes up that makes you say, wait a minute, this is not just plain vanilla. This is strawberry swirl. There's something going on here. Is
You
is
look at
that
the
is that pretty
situation.
much true?
Yes, you definitely look at the situation. I would get called, and well, we didn't get the call right away. It took a little time because the precinct gets it first, and an officer, Hollywood loves to show the detective showing up taking the missing persons report. It don't work that way here. It doesn't. A police officer shows up. It's usually a rookie cop. He'll take the report. He'll ask all the questions. He'll go maybe talk to a neighbor or two, but that's the investigation. And then he hands it to the detectives in the precinct. Detectives in the precinct try to solve it quickly. And if they don't, it comes to the missing person squad. Other police departments do it differently. Like I said, the NYPD is so big that has their own unit to do it. Other departments, smaller ones, probably the detective does it from start to finish. So, when I would go to the family, I would interview the family members. And when I say the family members, I mean anyone that is competent and anyone that is old enough to tell a story. I If a wife's reported missing, you got to ask the husband, okay, what is going on? And sometimes you get the truth, sometimes you don't. If a husband is missing, you'd ask the wife, what is going on? And then she'd be like, well, he hasn't been coming home. He's been staying at work late. We have a big fight, this and that. So then you're going to actually call his job and leave a message on his answering machine or call his cell phone. Are you there right now? If you are, the police are at your house. You need to contact your home. And a situation like that, which is the exact situation I had, the guy was fighting his wife and was sleeping at work and didn't tell the wife. So we found him at work and he called and he said, listen, we're not getting along. I've been not coming home. That's an example. But you
Mhm.
need to look at this situation. If a guy tells us, listen, my wife is not taking a medication in 3 months, she's been talking about suicide all week, that's probably a suicide or at least an attempt. So, uh, you know, you have to look at the suicide. How did she say she would do it? If they live by a bridge, you got to think, did she go to that bridge? Did she jump
Right.
off that bridge? you know, uh, Check in the hospitals. It happens. It's not as easy as you think. The hospitals are notorious for not giving you information. They're notorious for that.
Yeah.
So it's
And
not
it's
as easy as
harder
people
now.
think.
It's harder now than it was 10 or 15 years
Oh,
ago. Yeah.
oh, you're in the medical field. I would
Yeah.
tell the father quite often, the husband, I would say, can you call the hospital? Because they're not going to give me the information. They might give it to you. They might not. They're definitely not.
Exactly.
So you have the suicide angle, you have the medication angle. Now, if someone's not taking their medication, they might have been wandering the street for 3 days, and the neighbor called 911 said, this woman needs help. They took her to the psych ward. She's in the psych ward under no name. That's very common.
Yeah.
So you have situations like that, and then you have to look at the very rare cases of homicide.
Right.
We had cases when husband reports the wife missing, and you're like, something's not right. And detectives are good. We know. Not saying we know, but man, we get that sixth sense. We get there and we're like,
You
this
follow your
story
nose.
doesn't
Yep.
make sense. This guy is. I've seen cases where people are reporting it just to report it, and there's a difference between reporting it just to reporting and reporting it when you're covering something up. We had a case when an elderly woman went missing, and she lived with her extended family, and we all got the feeling, as I was the sergeant detectives, that the family is reporting this to cover something. So we would continue to go to the house until they go to the house. And the story never changed, but they had an interesting way of telling their story. It was very rehearsed about the aunt that's not there. And I used to joke with, because cop humor is notorious. Cop humor never ends. It's in stories, it's in movies, and it happens on every situation. Cop humor is interesting. It's not happened in front of the family but cop humor happens. So probably in the police car or whatever. So I tell the detectives, when you go to that lady's house and you talk to the family, whatever floorboard creaks, remember it because we're digging up that floor. So, you know, before I retired, they did find the aunt. They found the aunt in a lake in another part of New York,
Wow.
homicide. So when we re-interviewed the family, I didn't do the interview because it wasn't my case at that point. The detectives did. They started talking about a dead uncle all of a sudden. So they had
Hmm.
their story rehearsed. I don't know what the heck came of that case, but I truly felt I worked two cases as a sergeant in the NYPD where I felt the people reporting it committed a homicide and were covering it up.
Yeah.
It's
Trying to
not easy.
deflect. Yeah. Yeah.
It's not easy to interview a person when you think this is the suspect and he's lying to you. It's not easy, but it had to get done.
What you said early on in this, that way back when you, in your formative years, as it were, when you weren't a good student and deciding what you were going to do in life, uh, and cop was one, but the other was to be a writer. And so you have completed a book, right? Tell us about that.
Yes, like I said, I was writing early on, and I kept it quiet for my coworkers. I would write like cue cards or just on paper. Like I
Hmm.
started in the police academy, I'd write when I got home, and just to get the craft going. And then once I went to the precinct, I was like, wow, man, it hits you fast. There's a training, but it's on the job experience in the precinct. Like you're in the car, you're with your partner, and he's talking about the stock market, you're talking about the weekend you're gonna have, and 10 minutes later, you're on somebody's stoop and he's holding his neck. He just got stabbed. And you're talking to this guy and you're a rookie cop. I'm saying rookie cop, this is what I did. And then
Hmm.
as a rookie cop, you're trying to get the story out of this guy and he's not telling you who did it. You're like, this guy just got stabbed, but he's not even telling me. And then you're thinking to yourself, is this guy going to die right in front of me? And the ambulance shows up and the ambulance takes him away. And you get back in the car, you make a report, you tell the detectives go there, detectives take over a case like that. And then if he doesn't die, you never hear about that case again. You made the report, detectives, you'll never find out about it. So then I would get back in the car and my partner would go back to talking about the stock market like nothing ever happened because he's been there 15 years.
Right.
And I'm a rookie and I'm like, I was waiting on tables in a sports bar last year at this time.
Yeah.
How am I going to deal with this? So, and I went to college too, and college doesn't prepare you for this. It doesn't. College
No.
prepares you for other things, and what prepares you for it is to see it and live with it. And then, so I knew I was going to write. So then I would, go back to the precinct, and I did. Besides doing my reports and everything, there was times I took out the pen and paper because we're talking early '90s, 1994. I put in pen and paper everything I did and saw, and I didn't tell my family about it. I kept that from them. I wasn't married to kids or anything at the time, but my family members, I kept that from them because I didn't feel like to give them that darkness, and I didn't want to cloud them
Mhm.
or make my sisters nervous that I was going to work every day like this. So I wrote it down, and then I had an old school spiral notebook, and I
Mhm.
would have my little notes so I wouldn't forget. But I had a very good memory. I remember things that I was good. I think a lot of it I didn't even have to put down on paper, but I did. So I put it in the spiral notebook, and I would write a little story. And then the next day, it could be a burglary that, like, I tried to put the cop humor in when, like, the guy that did the burglary, like, walked right past us, and he's like whistling, and we're looking, and one guy goes, "That's him," and we're like, "Oh, that was the guy," and we all chased him, and only one guy caught on to it. So, like, little stories like that, like cop humor, I would write it down, and I kept it for my coworkers because I didn't want them to really be like, "Oh, this guy's writing a book." That would have been the ongoing joke because there's a lot of badgering jokes that go back. If they knew you were writing a book, everything you did would the joke would be about you writing something. They'd be like,
Yeah.
"Hey, Ferriso, I just dropped a pen on the floor. Why don't you fucking put in your book?"
Exactly. Cop
Yeah.
humor
So
again. So
yeah, cop humor.
what's the title of the book?
Yeah, all in a day's work and officers' accounts. 20 years NYPD.
Cool. And
Yeah, they're all short
you're
stories.
working on another one now, right?
Correct. I'm working on another one now.
That has to do with missing persons, correct? Yeah.
Yes, because when I retired, I was fielding a lot of missing person questions after I retired from
Yeah.
private eyes and stuff, and so I said, well, I got to write about missing persons. But you know, the missing person story has been written a lot. Every book's about it now. A lot
Right.
of authors, they're not 100% hitting the mark, you'd say. So I write about how a writer or a screenwriter, if they have a scene where their scene is the office phone call, which means that who's calling the detective bureau to give tips to a missing person. I'll write a whole chapter about the type of caller, why they're calling, what they're saying. And then I'll write about what the detective does with that statement and how it makes it to a report and how that statement can or cannot make it to the case. There's a lot of calls that it's information, but it's not going to make it into the case. When I say make it into the case, I mean like it might be on a file somewhere, but it's not making to the case when you're looking at this. So I'll
Yeah.
talk about the hierarchy of what's important. So it's really a guide for anyone writing or making it on the film that I need to
Mhm.
know about the type of person that calls 911. Who's going to call 911 when they see a body in the street? Who's going to walk past it and who's going to make the phone call? Because that's how the call comes in. A jogger sees a body in a ditch. The jogger goes, you know what? This isn't a drunk. This is a body. And the jogger will call 911 and say, there's a dead body. And you get there and you find out, wow, it's a dead body. And then I go through the process of how we know that dead body is someone that went missing a week ago that we've been looking for.
Wow. Well, do you have a title for this one yet?
Yeah. Looking at the author and screenwriter's guide for missing person investigation.
Cool. Cool. Well, where can people find you? I know when that now you're doing private investigations and mostly in missing persons, correct? But
Correct. Yes.
what's the name of your institution, as it were?
Institution. Yeah. Well, some of the people that call me need to be in an institution.
Exactly, I bet.
I get some interesting calls. I get a lot of things. People expect me to do things that are not legal. So I'm like, no, you're watching too much television. That
Yeah, you're a
doesn't happen.
PI. You ought to be able to do that.
Sure,
Why don't you
sure.
just go break into his house? Yeah.
Yeah, they think I have like these contacts with all the answers. So I'm like, no, but I could figure it out if you give me enough time. Just
Yeah.
I can't just make one phone call and do it.
Right.
So
Exactly.
yeah, I have Ferris Investigations. You can find it on my website, ferrisinvestigations.org.
Good. Cool. Well, John, this has been a treat, and I think that you have offered a lot of insight into what internal affairs does, what missing persons is all about, actually what police do, what detectives do, and I think that our viewers and listeners out there are going to be very grateful that you took the time to do this. And so I want to thank you for being here, and we'll have to do this again down the road, and we'll talk about a few other things.
That sounds great. Yes.
All
And
right.
thank you for having me on this show.
Well, thank you so much. Well, that concludes this episode of Criminal Mischief, the art and science of crime fiction. And I want to thank John Ferriso for being here and enlightening us into his world. So until next time, I'll see you everybody then.